Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Operation Live Theatre channel. So we regularly host chat with guest actors and creatives covering a range of topics, including the experience performing in certain shows, the artistic directions, upcoming projects, and also theatrical ecosystem as a whole. So if this is the type of content that you would like to see more or interested in, please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell notification below. And today we have the wonderful Jon Bradfield with us, who has written and composed a number of pantos in his career, from what I can see, and has also written a play called Animal that has recently completed its run at the Manchester Hope Mill Theatre and I think also at Bristol at the moment. It also won the Manchester Theatre's Through the Mill Prize there. So in addition to that, Animal was also shortlisted in the top five on the Papatango Prize out of more than 1,500 entries, which sounds very impressive actually. So Jon, I'm sure that overview really doesn't do you any justice. So, but what I would
No,
like to say
it
is
sounded,
it's,
it
it's
sounded
such a
lovely, actually.
pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you
How are
very much
you?
for having me. I'm really well, thank you. Yes, thank you for having me.
So I think as a start, it would be really helpful and useful to hear from you a very short snippet or overview on what Animal is really all about.
Right. It's describing your own work is so weird, but so Animal is about a young, severely disabled gay guy who he relies on people for pretty much for things that we take for granted, day-to-day care. And one of the things that he can't do is wank. So he's 25, he's had no sexual experience. He's frustrated without necessarily knowing quite why. Um, and he's persuaded to go on Grindr, the hookup app, to put himself out there, which he's nervous about because of, you know, there is not much there is not much representation of disabled people that makes them seem fully sexualized. So he's wary of what people will think of him. But yeah, he goes online and begins a sort of sexual journey. And obviously, when you click with someone, that then becomes a romantic journey as well. So really, what it's about is so Josh Heppel, who's an activist who had brought the idea to me, he talks about how this quite often disabled people aren't seen as capable of giving affection, love, sexual pleasure, or deserving of it, and that's such a big part of the human experience for a lot of people that sort of taking that perception of them away is to take away quite a big part of someone's humanity. So that's the impulse for it, and that's what it's about. But what it's then about is what most plays are about, which is the relationships between people and the conflicts there. So there are quite a lot of relationships in the play. The central character, David, has a housemate who is also an assistant, a carer for him. He has a paid assistant who looks after his needs. He begins a relationship with someone. He has a best friend, and these are all people that he has conflicting needs with. So it's about relationships and the way that love is expressed differently in different relationships. That sounds very abstract, actually, but yes, that's what it's about.
Well, I think you can't very much give too much away anyway, right? Because people will have to see this in order to understand the full
Right?
picture.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, I suppose the brief way of saying it's about, yeah, it's about hookup culture, disability, love of various kinds. Yeah.
all right, people who are listening, those are the three keywords essentially that you learn that you should be listening out for. If any of those concepts is of interest to you, go and see this. Um, so you mentioned Josh Heppel a little bit earlier. So to create this story. So can you give us a little bit of background on how this relationship between you and Josh came about, and what on this little creative journey, as it were, what was the fun and challenging element of this creation?
Yeah. So Josh got in touch with me. So, as you mentioned in the intro, I've written quite a lot of adult queer pantomimes. A theatre called Above the Stag Theatre, which closed last year, was it? I did like a decade of pantos, and he'd come to see them. I didn't know him really, but he got in touch. He'd had this idea for a play, um, about someone whose practical physical circumstances were similar to his. Um, had come to the conclusion that he wasn't a playwright, wasn't someone to write it, but really wanted a play of that nature to exist. So he came to me with the idea and said, "Here are kind of my notes on it. Would you like to work on it together? And you be the writer?" Because he thought, weirdly, he thought that my stupid, crass adult panto humor was somehow that I think he was keen that it wasn't going to become a play that was too agitprop, too overtly activist, and that it would be funny and a fun night out, which I hope it is. So he brought the idea to me, which is amazing because I struggle with ideas, right? Someone gives me an idea, I can write, but I struggle to go, oh, what would be a great subject? And this seemed like a unique thing. It's something I would never have thought to write about myself. I wouldn't have felt I'm not disabled, and I wouldn't have felt I had any permission to engage with that as a subject. So yeah, we talked about his ideas, his kind of philosophies around being disabled. He had a starting point, a guy who can't wank and who is quite severely disabled and who therefore must go on this journey. And it was my job to sort of absorb his experience as a disabled man. I think that was important. To steal things from his life to put into the play, to make things up, to imagine other characters and their impact on him and his impact on them. And to sort of somehow mold all this stuff into a story that has, a beginning and a middle and end, like that it has a shape to it. It was great, and it's challenging. It's been challenging for him because some of it, there's stuff in the play that I've basically lifted from his life, and there's other stuff that I've completely made up, and I'm not even sure now what's what. But it is, that's difficult, especially when there isn't that much disabled representation on stage. He obviously identifies incredibly closely with the character. We've had lots of conversations where we've had to both remind ourselves, this is not you. The character is not you. What their practical circumstances are, but that's difficult, I think. But no, it's been an eye opening for me. I didn't really know anyone. I haven't known anyone well who is quite severely disabled before. So, like, as an eye opener to what that entails, that's been extraordinary. Like learning how much time and effort just goes into making sure that there is someone who's going to be there tomorrow so that you can eat and go to the toilet, right? That can sap up a lot of time and energy, and that's a boring thing to have to worry about, right? Like most of us don't have to worry about that, and that's boring. Like, but it can take a lot. So things like that have been like just the sort of the work that goes into it when you have those extra needs.
Yeah, and I think, based on what you said, obviously, the topic itself can be quite heavy, very serious, but obviously, I think one of the reasons why Josh approached you, like you said, was because, he does may not want to turn into that kind of subject as well, right? So, so what kind of precautions, I guess, did you take to ensure that, oh, actually, let's make sure that the story doesn't really just focus on the more challenging elements of it. Let's put a different angle to it, so it's a little bit more fun, a little bit more enjoyable for the audience to watch and to relate to some of the other aspects of the people with disability. So how did you go around doing that?
Well, actually, so it's, I mean, there is only one person in the play who is physically disabled, right? Um, and so it's worth saying there is like, it's not about representing people. I was very clear that I couldn't be really the writer of a project that represented, disabled people. What I could do is work with Josh to sort of create one distinctive disabled character. But I guess, I think it's probably not so much subject as tone that perhaps makes things funny, and I suppose the way you order a story, in that as has a sort of sense of, there's a little bit of rom-com to it. It feels quite like a sort of messy sitcom at times, because it's set in a flat with two people sharing a flat, and people that, larger than life characters that come and go, both like friends and also the various people so David, the central character, the various people that he hooks up with. So it does have it's got quite a buoyant sitcom feel to it, I think, and I think it looks quite sitcom-y. You can have quite a lot of fun with Grindr hookups, right? So we've got Will Oxborough, who's an actor in it. He plays a series of, Grindr shags, right? Which is really nice, like, because he's a very versatile actor, so he gets to be sort of, lovely, warm, calm one minute, the next some kind of like terrifying, weird fetishist the next time. And I don't mean that in a kink shaming way. I mean that's as in the way that scene is played. He's quite menacing. But yeah, so you can have fun with that. You can have fun with recognition. I mean, anyone who's been on dating apps or hookup apps, I think, will recognize the sort of the tropes, the way that we talk to each other when we're slightly at a remove, when we're talking to strangers about very intimate stuff, the bluntness, the demands that we make, the way we perhaps come across on these apps without realizing it. It's been, so there's a lot of text conversation, a lot of dating app chats, Grindr chats in the show, and the set's been designed so that it's got these sort of sliding doors, and they become like screens with chats and stuff. So you see it all sort of projected out onto the set. So I think, there's a lot of that. Those get a lot of laughs, and they get a lot of gasps, which is nice, because I think what can seem perhaps normal when you're in that frame of mind, when you're sat in a theatre and see that kind of language, you're more removed from it, and it's more, shocking perhaps. Also, I'm aware that I'm quite unshockable, but I'll sit there in the theatre next to someone who, isn't using Grindr or whatever. So they are a bit more surprised by it. But yeah, there's a lot of humour in that sort of stuff, I think. And just, in the sort of interactions between friends who know each other well and have that kind of banter. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting concept, because obviously, I think not everybody, like you said, but I think especially in the younger kind of generation, there's probably a huge number of people that have used a dating app of some shape or form to a certain degree. So so I think there's going to be a level of relatedness, how relatable that some of those could be. And I've definitely gone through a situation where I felt certain messages were okay, but actually looked at by a different pair of eyes, they'll be like, "Oh, actually, why would you say this? Or why would you ask that kind of questions?" So yeah, eye opening experience, I'd say. So I think that side sounds all very fascinating. From now,
Yeah,
like you said, from a third person perspective.
there was a someone who came into audition for one of the characters. Was I found it really interesting actually when we auditioned. So obviously actors say very nice things about your play when they audition because they want not going to slug it off. So, but it was interesting hearing what different actors had related to, and it was really heartening actually. But there's one guy. He was South Asian. He was straight, or at least had a girlfriend because he was talking about his girlfriend. And he'd said that the thing he related to most was David's experience on Grindr. And I think partly he was talking about being, of an ethnic minority and relating to sort of the way that that plays out on a dating app. But yeah, just thought that sort of, but more generally, I think about the experience of online dating. I found that really interesting because I thought that would be something that was particularly a gay relatable thing. But no, I think people relate to different aspects of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we touched on David a little bit already. So and like you said, although the story in its as a whole is not about just representation about people with disability, but obviously there's an element of that within it. So and obviously you have consulted with Josh during the development of the story. So did you take any further steps to really ask about other people's opinions or further consultation to really make sure that we're actually let's make sure that whatever's in there are not is not no not representative per se, but at least the language is used or certain perceptions is at least appropriate for that community.
Sure, the short answer is no, and that's a deliberate thing. Because actually, I think so. Something, and obviously, yeah, Josh doesn't represent disabled people actually any more than David the character does. But he did come to me with a vision, and he's quite political. He also said something quite interesting. He said, "I wish there was a disabled community in the way that there's a gay community, but there isn't one. Like there isn't." Is how he sees it. I mean, obviously, there are disabled people, and sometimes they interact and they have overlapping needs. But he feels quite strongly about the way that language is used. So do other people, but they might not necessarily agree, right? So he's very invested in something called the social model of disability, which is fair, right? It's a fairly widespread accepted way of thinking about disability, which is where so he would talk about he is disabled, but he would say I don't have disabilities. It's not a person with disabilities. I have impairments, as in, like, for example, not being able to walk. He's disabled when the world around him is constructed in such a way that doesn't cater to those impairments. So, I mean, like, a really basic example is, right, if you're invited to a party in the upstairs floor of a pub and they only have stairs, right? The disability happens because of the stairs, or because someone went, "Oh, I'll use that as my venue," without thinking about their mate who can't use stairs, right? That's where the disability is. So I tried to make the play reflect that kind of language without, I hope, being too didactic. It's not. I think there probably are moments where it feels a little bit preachy, but I've tried not to do that. It's not a play that's trying to overtly educate. I think empathy is more important. Put yourself in a character's place for 2 hours and just experience that story, I think, is probably more powerful than, or at least, yeah, it's the approach that I'm more interested in than simply going educating. But yeah, I tried to make the language in the play reflect language that Josh likes. Little tiny things, like, for example, you know, saying that someone is using a wheelchair rather than in a wheelchair, because a wheelchair is not something you're trapped in. Wheelchair is something that enables, right? Like if you can't walk, but you have a powered wheelchair, then actually you can get to Sainsbury's as well as the next person, right? There's no, so people talk about, oh yeah, they're confined to a chair, they're in a chair, but actually they're using it. It's an enabling thing. Also, the majority of people who use wheelchairs don't use them 100% of the time.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I mean, Josh can get about his flat without a wheelchair. He on his knees, so it's like knee walking, which means his jeans get fucked up. But because also he can't have like carpets wall to wall because he's got a wheelchair, right? So, um, but yeah, that was something I hadn't really thought about. I'd been aware of some of the stuff around language before, but yeah, it was really about reflecting that. And I could have gone down the route of going, and I almost did at one point think I need to talk to other disabled people. Actually, I thought, no, I wouldn't do that with any other play. I wouldn't get, you know,
Yeah,
if I'm
absolutely.
writing a play about a gay character, I'm not going to go and sound out a load of gay people. But that's different because I know a lot of gay people, so I suppose that would be different. But no, it was. I think anything that any piece of art that like dramatic art that has a character that belongs to a group that isn't very well represented, it's got quite a weight on its shoulders, right?
Mhm.
And it's going. I think it will. It'll be interesting. We've had really amazing responses from disabled people who've seen it, but I'm fully aware there'll be other people who maybe go, no, I feel misrepresented by this, and it's not trying to represent anyone, but I think that's a burden that will inevitably be on it.
Yeah. And actually, just touching on David, obviously, obviously we have casted a fantastic actor for this role. So beyond some of his personal experience that he brings to the role itself, did you have any other type of criteria you had in mind when looking for a specific actor for this?
No, I mean, just someone good. I mean, no, it was real. Actually, it was a really difficult question because actually, obviously, people have different impairments. Like the character is written. I imagine him having basically similar impairment and level of impairments as Josh has. So I wrote the character have a speech impairment, but I didn't write that out. I just said that he's got a speech impairment, and there is repetition built into the script as people ask him to repeat himself and so on. So ideally, we wanted that, but didn't know if that we didn't really want someone to be faking that. That felt like a more important piece of authentic, something to be authentic with whether someone was a wheelchair user or not, which the character is, but it's not very relevant to the story. So I don't know. I did at one point think perhaps I've written a character that we can't cast. And then yeah, Chris came in to audition and he blew us away. I mean, he was funny, and that was important. And I think that's important because the character is often he's difficult. He's an angry character. He doesn't behave well all the time. He loses his temper, he loses his rag, but he is quite funny. He's witty, and we needed someone with the charisma and the ability to land a laugh, so that we would really enjoy being with that character, even when they're being a dick. That felt important, and yeah. So when Chris came in, it's like, oh, sometimes you don't know what you want until it's in front of you. But like you do auditions, and you're the one in the position of power because there's 3 or 4 of you sat behind a desk, and actors come in and they've travelled miles and you see them for a few minutes, and it's brutal. But when you see someone good, the minute they walk out of the room, suddenly the power balance changes, and you're the ones going, "Oh God, I hope we didn't seem like weirdos. Oh, I hope we look like people we wouldn't work with." Um, so yeah, it was really hard. We didn't know. We just knew that we wanted someone who is disabled, would describe themselves as disabled, and yeah, beyond that, we didn't really know because you can't prescribe. Everyone's disability is different. Ideally, we wanted someone who had cerebral palsy. That felt important.
Sure. I appreciate that we're running out of time, and I don't really want to take up too much more. So, in the last minute, do you want to give an overview on where the play is going next, and anything you want to say to the people who might be coming?
Uh, Thank you for coming. If you're coming, it's going to the Park Theatre, the lovely Park Theatre in Finsbury Park in London, which is wonderful because I can cycle there in 15 minutes, which is great. It's a lovely theatre. It's very similar to the Dunbar Warehouse. If you've ever been there, it's nicely intimate wraparound. It's a fun night out. It has a very good cast of very lovely, charismatic actors. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you very much, Jon, for coming over to share your experience.
Thank you
And
so much for having me.
yeah, we look forward to seeing you very soon.
And I'll see you on press night. Is that right? You're
Yes,
coming.
on Friday.
Great.